On July 15th, 2024 at 9:50 a.m. Eastern U.S. time, Mars in Taurus conjuncts Uranus in Taurus, and this kind of sparks off a whole bunch of transits in July and August. So normally, Timothy, Glenn, and I do videos when Pluto is making a major move, but we're making an exception this time just because the transits are so important and so potentially intense that we wanted to get something out before September. So welcome, Timothy. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And today, this is being recorded on the 5th, which is the day of the new moon, is touching a little something in the US chart.
Yeah, and I have a video that really goes into a lot more detail on what those points are, but I'm sure we'll end up talking about some of that today just because it's also relevant for this Mars Uranus conjunction. So it was your idea to do this video. Where should we start?
Well, we could start today.
Okay.
Because really, this really does tie in with the US chart. And you can put that in the description box, the link to your previous video, because that really does go into some of the finer details of this. But this is really starting what I would call a cascade of astrological events. And this will carry on. And even though sometimes it might look like things are not necessarily related, it's all intertwined.
It's not just like one snapshot and you look at one isolated event. You look at kind of the cascade or the buildup of things that are happening and how those keep kind of lighting additional fires.
Right. And as we know, the US does have a bit of influence on the rest of the world. So what comes down here is going to roll out, or there will be fallout for the rest of the world. And so I'm looking at massive, drastic shifts here. Now, we didn't discuss this earlier, but do you still tune in all to Cliff High and the Webbot?
Sometimes, not tons, no.
Okay, because he's had stuff about July 15th and 16th. And not too long ago, he said, you still don't think there's something with that one? Ask an astrologer. So we'll talk about this.
Yeah.
Because this is really like getting the ball rolling right now. But the real hot spot is going to be, starting 10 days from now. Although with Mars, things can get triggered a little ahead of time. An analogy I use for the effect of Mars is, okay, you've got a flame and you're going to put some fuel on it. Okay, so you can put wood and coal, it's all real slow stuff. All right, but what if you flow kerosene there? But it's not a volatile fuel, but okay, there's gonna be more action. Well, so we'll see Mars as more like naphtha or gasoline. It's a volatile fuel. So the fumes reach it and everything blows before the actual fluid gets there. So Mars does trigger things earlier than expected.
Yeah. Now, to put things into perspective, though, I mean, we also had an important Mars-Uranus conjunction back in 2022. So late July, early August of 2022 got set off with Mars, Uranus, and the North Node, a triple conjunction a little earlier in Taurus. So this one is at 26 degrees, 19 minutes Taurus. So anybody that's listening that has something significant in fixed signs, from like, say, 21 degrees of fixed signs to 1 degree of the mutables, you're going to be activated also by the things that we're talking about. But a lot of what we're talking about is related to the United States just because there's a very loose Mars-Uranus conjunction in the US natal chart, with Uranus at 8 Gemini and Mars at 21 Gemini. That 21 Gemini point I've been talking about a lot because that gets really pinged in October when Jupiter stations retrograde there. But the Civil War was triggered by a Uranus return for the United States, followed by Mars kind of getting a little bit ahead of the action, about 6 degrees of Gemini. That sparked the Civil War. So this Mars Uranus conjunction, it's in Taurus, but it still has impact, maybe extra for the US, right? Just because of that placement and those triggers within the US chart.
Yeah, and for a moment to reflect on this journey that Uranus is taking through the sign of Taurus. Back, what was it, 2017, 2018, as it worked through doing its triple transit across the cusp. I'd written 2 articles on that then. And it's like, okay, what's our primary financial sign? Yeah, good old Taurus. And this time around, he shows up like every 84 years. Uranus is ready to really rock the boat, taken into the context of all this other stuff, because the context shifts all the time. So it's never exactly the same when you get the same transit again, because the context has shifted.
Mm-hmm.
But now the context is showing that we're ready to reach the end of the old plutocracy. And so buckle up or just let go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yesterday I was doing some research. Somebody on my blog suggested looking at Civil War transits and now, and just seeing, okay, what are the things that are similar? What are the things that are different? And one of the big differences was that Pluto was not in Aquarius back then. Pluto was actually in Taurus. And then the real action with Uranus and Mars was occurring in Gemini. And so we're getting kind of some flavors of that, but it is different this time, and even different in terms of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that we had in April, April 20th. It's like, what do you see that as? Kind of like the preview, or like the big ideas with Jupiter, and then Mars comes along for the action?
Yeah. And wow. Yeah, this whole game with, of course, we had, Jupiter conjunct Uranus in Taurus recently, and that's a huge one. That really sets the stage. And then Mars comes through and lights the fuse. So, and I don't see this being, strictly economic, but there's going to be something really pretty profound that may shake things up a bit.
Mm-hmm. And with Taurus too, I mean, we often think of the financial sector, but it's also agriculture. It's also the body, a lot of I mean, I think of Taurus as like the earthiest of the earth elements. It's very grounded. So we're talking nature, we're talking, possibility for accidents, right? Because Mars, I know in my own chart, I track Mars, because whenever Mars gets anywhere near my midheaven, which this is, I have some kind of accident. I had my TBI, I broke my pinky toe, I've had, like, there've been numerous things. And I know in tracking other people's charts, Mars-Uranus interactions, often that is a time to exercise a little extra caution, not to be quite so reckless in terms of physical activities, especially with that happening in Taurus.
Well, if you want a combination that would bring you some results with recklessness, this is the combo. Yeah. Many times with Mars interacting with some of the other planets, you read your books like Planets in Transit or whatever. It's like, okay, don't handle sharp objects, and yeah, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm really looking forward to this one, because this is time to really shake things up. So it's like, okay, it's being laid out now, and now we're ready for it all to play out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning before we started really recording about not just the 15th, but a few days earlier, because again, Mars often is a bit impatient and can act early. But then you had flagged the 16th because of what's happening with the moon that day. Do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, but I want to mention what I had mentioned in that article the other day, that at 26 degrees of Taurus, we also have one of the fixed stars there. Algol, the ghoul, long known as the demon star. And in traditional astrology, that's had a pretty rough rap. There are some astrologers now who've been looking at it and finding that the other side of what has been there traditionally, but still it's pretty rough energy. So Mars is coming across what's his name? Uranus in Taurus at 26 degrees, but that's where Algol is as well. And so on the 16th, then the moon in Scorpio will come up and be opposite all of that. So in just, here we in a matter of hours, it goes exactly opposite Uranus, opposite Algol, and opposite Mars. But it's interesting that it will also be forming a pretty loose grand trine, because you've got the sun over 24 degrees of Cancer, and then Neptune is at 29 degrees of Pisces. So coming through that part in Scorpio forms a loose grand trine, but I would like to interpret that as the silver lining.
Well, and also the silver lining at that 26-degree Taurus point, rounding up for the Sabian symbol. I actually typed this out just because it, as reckless and as intense as this could be, there are some mitigating energies in terms of like this particular degree. So, Taurus 27 degrees, an old Indian woman selling the artifacts of her tribe to passers-by. And then Dane Rudyard's keynote is peaceful adaptation to collective needs. And then at the end, in serene adjustment to the vital needs of the whole, which he sees himself as a fleeting part. So, I mean, to me, that's also a kind of silver lining in that of all the degrees where this could happen, it's happening in kind of a little more of an innocuous degree. Now, is Algol at that exact, that would also be at 27 Taurus in terms of the Sabian symbol?
Yes, because it's at 2630 right now.
Okay, so
they're called fixed stars because they barely move at all.
Yeah. And historically, what have you noticed about this particular star or impact on events when big transits happen around that spot?
Well, we usually have things happen that are a bit disruptive. And yeah, you can read some of the things from the old astrology and talk about violence and whatever else. And yeah, sometimes that happens. But we'll see here. There is the silver lining. So, and besides, remember that we are the creator. And if we're going to feed energy into fear mongering, then we're helping generate that.
Right.
So I'd rather focus on the silver lining and at the same time not go into, new age fluff bunny, oh, everything's nice and wonderful, when it really isn't. Because the takedown of the old system is probably not going to be real smooth and gentle. But that doesn't mean that we are in it. But also with that loose grand trine in water, that's a reminder, since that's our feelings and our patterns of emoting the feelings. If we have an emotional investment in specific outcomes, and this team versus that team, Democrat versus Republican or whatever it is, well, good luck. We're feeding our creative energy into that. In other words, we're allowing our creation, our creatorship to be hijacked. And that's unfortunately where most of the human race is still operating, although we do see this massive shift. A lot of people are waking up and seeing through the illusions of the propaganda machine, etc. So I'd rather feed more energy into our possibilities of what we can do, because when the old system starts collapsing here, and it's going to be spectacular on some level, but when it starts collapsing, there's nothing of us that needs to collapse with it. For example, okay, commercial real estate, it all, it's coming down. All right, so that part of that sector really, it starts collapsing, but the energy is no longer trapped in that dysfunctional system. The energy is still there. Only now, at grassroots level, co-creatively, we can tap into that energy because it's no longer trapped in that system. But instead of sitting here and going, well, who's going to be president and who's going to be in charge of it? And it's like, we are. So time to step into it. And that's also something else that is encouraged by Mars. Mars isn't saying, okay, let's all get in line and let's be good little kids in school. And it's like, Mars just says, screw that.
Yeah. Well, and Uranus as the liberator too. I mean, a lot of times from the negative, it's like, oh, the chaos and the recklessness and oh, everything's turning upside down. But it is also the liberator. And so when you get that Mars Uranus energy there, look at what's stuck and what gets shaken loose. And then with the moon, I like that idea with the grand trine and that water energy of paying attention to emotions, because, and I often say this in sessions to people, you can just kind of shift slightly, right? Like if you are really, really frustrated, which is a Mars Uranus kind of energy, if you're really frustrated, you can shift that slightly in its determination. And it's the same energy, but one of them is going to burn you up and give you liver problems and, headaches and make you angry. Whereas determination is going to get things done. And that's very Mars in Earth signs, right? Is actually to get it done.
Yeah, like Larry the Cable Guy, get her done. But Mars can be also just very assertive without necessarily being aggressive.
Mm.
And so to be self-assertive, that, in other words, let's not take the bait that's being proffered by the public narratives out there.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with all of this stuff, heading toward Gemini. Well, we're going to see all kinds of narratives. It's like the narrative war is going on. Not that there hasn't been that going on all along, but the propaganda machine is losing more and more of its audience, which is really interesting. So as we get into August as well, because that's going to be like, whoa, okay. Our friend Jupiter is going to it's going to be till like next June. He's going to be in Gemini, where we deal with all those data sets and all the information, all those cool ideas and so forth. And so being practical and down to earth with information and making sure we have a reasonable dose of facts involved instead of just the big Sagittarian idealism, which is wonderful. Love that. However, people can get carried away with that idealism without realizing what they're suggesting on a practical level. If you bring in the factual data sets from Gemini, it's like, okay, yeah, it's a wonderful idealism, but it's not practical right now. Just make some adjustments. And again, instead of getting emotionally involved in it, stand off to the side.
Yeah. And I still keep coming back to Neptune in the 29th degree of Pisces, which it was at the time that the Civil War was declared also. A lot of people look at Neptune in Aries as, oh, Civil War or whatever, but it was actually at the 29 Pisces point, just 2 minutes away from where it is now. So there is this energy of kind of like willful deception, right? I mean, there've been enough things that have not added up that it's kind of like if you're swallowing the mainstream narrative just, in whole, that's a willful denial at this point. And that's kind of that 29 Pisces energy too. It can be seeing through the illusions, but it can also be just having it all in, nothing is real anymore. And I think that that's an important thing to remember because we grow over time and as a nation also grow over time. So just because this is a repeat of that 29 Pisces, it doesn't mean that we have to fall for it. And also, unlike at the time of the Civil War, Neptune was at 29 degrees, 57 minutes of Pisces, and then very soon after moved into Aries. But we're having this extended time in 29th degree Pisces, and then it goes back. And it's like, okay, let's reassess. Let's see what's happening. And so there is this kind of back and forth, like a violin or something on that final degree. And so it doesn't feel the same, even though there are a number of kind of echoes of Civil War energy, echoes of Revolutionary War energy. It feels different astrologically as well.
Yeah. And at the same time, we realize with Pluto working its way gradually, ever so gradually, into Aquarius, that is a tremendous, really dynamic shift in our consciousness here. So that's not what was going on in Civil War time.
Right. Right. Oh, and I'm glad that you brought up the 29th degree Capricorn, because we have that full moon in Capricorn, the second one in a row, on July 21st. And that is in that final degree of Capricorn. And I looked up the Sabian symbol for that one. You can't make this stuff up. It's spooky how much this tracks. But the Sabian symbol for that one, Capricorn 30, because rounding up, a secret meeting of men responsible for executive decisions in world affairs. Dane Rudyard adds a keynote: the power to assume responsibility for crucial choices arrived at after mature discussions with those who share this power. And it's executive power. And that's the same degree that Pluto will be stationing, not stationing retrograde in, but going back into Capricorn and then stationing direct in that degree. So we're getting that energy like majorly coming, but it's coming after this Mars Uranus meeting in Taurus.
And also the day before that, the 20th, Mars has its ingress into Gemini. And so get ready for the information wars to amp up, because Mars is going to cruise straight through. Last year he did his retrograde in I don't know, it was 2 years ago, did his full retrograde in Gemini. So he was there for like 7 months.
Yeah.
But he's cruising through now. But and when he catches up with Jupiter, it's like, okay, this is going to be wild. But if we can have fun with this, it'll help so much. And also remember that, we're emotionally driven creatures. And so if we put more energy into playing with the data sets and having fun with the perspectives and realize that we are these universal beings, we've been trained from infancy and actually from other lifetimes here to think that we are nothing but these pathetic little snotlings from 3D planet Earth, and other people have the power and blah, blah, blah. Well, no, if we step into our universal creatorship and then our energies can start coalescing, well, this will make a huge difference. And so instead of being so attached to specific, narratives and so on and so forth, and attached to outcomes, like right now, who is the most unpredictable influence in our solar system astrologically?
Uranus?
Uranus is. And he's playing a huge role in this part of the game. So you want to make predictions? Good luck. It's just, we know this is going to be pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean that's the tricky thing about kind of reporting on these things in advance. It's like, well, you want to give people the heads up. You want to give some indicator like, okay, these are some hotspot dates. These are some energies that are up. But with Uranus, it's going to be something that you haven't thought of usually.
Yeah. And, Uranus, can be pretty tricky about things. It's like we might really have it pegged like, okay, what's going to happen? We've got it all figured out. And Uranus will say, well, in that case, I won't do anything. All right, buddy. And of course, with our Aquarian energy, we get that.
Yeah. I like your mention of play. And I mean, as someone with a bunch of Gemini planets, I mean, play it's an important thing. And that is a way that you can really maximize the energy of Gemini. Is, it's got that trickster energy, but also kind of like the light humor, the levity, the silly memes, or like it doesn't have to be this thing that gets so pinned down, that's so heavy. And the other thing that I think is really helpful to remember in times of potential chaos or uncertainty is the ability to pivot, the ability to, oh, you know what? I don't like that. I don't like the way this is going. I'm going to dial that back and go over here. I mean, we do have this tremendous flexibility with the stuff going on in mutable signs, including Saturn still in Pisces. He's not busy nailing stuff down because he really can't do that in Pisces. And so it just feels like we're in this kind of, choose your adventure, right? It's going to be weird. There's going to be a lot of change and there will be some adventure, but to some extent, we have the ability to say, this is the kind of adventure that I would prefer, and this is where I'm going to walk.
Yeah, and regarding the playful part of all of this, God, it was like decades ago, John Cleese had said, if you want truly creative employees, give them time to play. Because that was part of the secret of Monty Python, is that they would allow themselves to just, go off the rails and get, just wild and silly. And then these bursts of creative genius would come out. So the playfulness helps us lighten up. So you want to get down and heavy, or do you want to lighten up? And Gemini can do that. And especially with narratives, ideas, etc. So yeah, let's lighten up with this. And instead of being so emotionally invested in I want this candidate or I want that candidate, well, it's all a script anyway. It's like a movie, it's a play being put on. All the world's a stage, except that there are certain latitudes that a director would have in interpreting the script and staging it. And maybe the producer wants to throw this and that and change the scenery. And the actors do have a little room for ad libs and new bits and business and so forth. But overall, this really is scripted. At least that system out there. There's one thing. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
One thing that has been noted over and over again, that it's like it's run by AI. It's artificial intelligence. And it doesn't understand humor. Especially sarcasm, doesn't get it at all. It doesn't get it because it doesn't have the human heart. And when you get the heart and the playful mind together, then this is where the real magic can happen. So the time can get tumultuous in the external game out there. But it's really opening all kinds of windows of opportunity for us.
And one of the things that I have found helpful in kind of framing stories is, and this is probably from my English major background, but you can have the same characters and the same plot, but if it's in a different genre, it's going to play out very different. So like if something is a story that takes place in World War II, but it's a love story that takes place in World War II, the energy of that story and what unfolds is going to be different than if it's a comedy that takes place in World War II, or if it's, a documentary, or, there's different frames that we can put on things, even if we are living through the same events, even if we have the same people involved. It's kind of like, well, what kind of story are you in? And to a great extent, I think that our own perspective helps to frame that. And that's independent of the external realm.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of different ways you can play with the script. In fact, back in my old theatrical days, we had this production of Comedy of Errors. And since the director had spent a few years after graduation at Stratford-on-Avon, she had all kinds of cool ideas because, that's a place where they do all kinds of wild stuff with Shakespeare. And they had done it there. So we did it as a Western here in the U.S. So it was a riot. It came across. And it was just, Yeah, it was so much fun. And it's like, okay, you're gonna go see this Shakespearean play, and you got these people talking like this. It's like, oh, whatever. But it's fun. So if we can just have fun with this to the best of our ability, because yeah, we have stuff coming at us that is not necessarily fun because we have to make adjustments, and so much of this is just letting things go and letting them be and letting them just fade into the field. And since your moon and my sun are both at that magical spot where Pluto's been visiting and will be visiting more, just came over retrograde. It's like, okay, 2 down, 3 to go. So, I mean, how much stuff is getting chipped away in our lives? It's crazy.
Yeah. And there were a couple things that I thought were worth mentioning too, in terms of what's happening in August, and that is, of course, Mercury retrograde. So the ruler of Gemini, but this is a real interesting one because Mercury goes retrograde in early Virgo. We've got a new moon in Leo on August 4th, and August 4th or 5th, depending on your time zone, is when Mercury stations retrograde. But again, with the Sabian symbols, I looked up the final point of where Mercury is going to finish the retrograde. So moving back into Leo and stations direct on August 28th. Mercury, the Sabian symbol where the messenger stations direct is Leo 22, a carrier pigeon fulfilling its mission. Keynote, spirituality in terms of training for service to mankind. In contrast with the intoxicated chicken, we now have the successfully trained carrier pigeon delivering the message it was its function to carry. And just Dean Rudyard goes on, but this is the ideal of the world server. And I just find that so interesting that, this is the Mercury retrograde stationing direct point. It's like Mercury will have fulfilled its mission, and all this stuff about bird flu and all of that. And it's like, this is not the intoxicated chicken. Like this is the carrier pigeon. I've been having so much fun with the Sabian symbols because somebody has a real sense of humor with the way that the universe is unfolding in terms of the transits.
Yeah. And of course, who is the messenger?
Mercury.
There you go.
It's like you can't make this stuff up. But again, kind of panning back, it feels like an energy of accomplishment or success or kind of like a reassuring dream or something that's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's crazy, but you got this. Like the stopgap measures are in place. People are functioning in the ways that they need to. The transits are eliciting the responses that need to happen.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't mention about the 16th, when the moon is moving through Scorpio, which is fairly intense, but it will also form a trine at 19 degrees here to Saturn in Pisces. So that's another one that's going to help people see through the illusions, especially of the system. Because who represents the system?
Saturn.
Our solar system. That's good old Saturn. And of course, you throw him in the ocean of Pisces and he's swimming around in dreamtime going, oh, wow, what was in those brownies? Whoa. But it really does help people not get caught in these strict interpretations of specific agendas. And how much of the so-called news out there is totally agendistic. It's agenda from A to Z. But we're at this point now where more and more of those illusions will be easier for people to see through, even some that we would just jokingly call the normies, because they turn on their television. Those are the holy prophets of their religion, and we do know some of those.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about Saturn in Pisces, that historically, that's not a good time for old regimes. The
Nope.
Soviet Union kind of fell with Saturn in Pisces. And I just remember when I was there, I was in the Soviet Union in the summer of 1990. And so, I mean, things were already coming off the rails at that point. Nobody believed anything. And it was kind of like the Wild West, but I never felt threatened. People were taking care of each other, but there was just this general knowledge and feeling of like none of it's real. None of it matters. And I guess I should say I did feel threatened once because I laughed when I was in line at Lenin's tomb, and you're not allowed to do that. And like two guards with clubs came after me. So I mean that was kind of threatening, but people interceded. People were like, "Oh, she's just a silly American. She didn't know what the rules were or whatever." And there was this kind of protective grace that was almost like a fairy tale. And I do feel like there's some of that. I mean, talk about like what kind of a story are you in? With Saturn in Pisces, there is kind of that like Robin Hood energy, or the fairy tale energy where the kids get rescued by some sort of fairy godmother or something. It's like the plans of the top-down authority, it just kind of dissolves. It's not able to take root unless in your mind you decide that that's the kind of story that you want to be living in.
And since we've got this cascade beginning now of these events in the second half of 2024, we have to remember that in the second half of 2024, Pluto finishes its time in Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
So the old top-down structure is going to be coming down because on 11/19, November 19th,
Yep.
Finally, that's done. And Pluto is then in Aquarius for more than 2 decades to come.
Yeah. And I really look at that as the end of the US Pluto return also. I mean, it's still kind of in orb, but I feel like once Pluto is fully ensconced in Aquarius, it's like, like we're done.
Yeah, because degree wise, yeah, we could say it's still in the orb of influence, but it's now an out of sign conjunction. So that weakens it right there. But there's so much emphasis being put on the age of Aquarius now that shifts the energies anyway.
Yeah.
So also Aquarius can be playful as well.
Yeah, kind of zany. Kind of kooky.
Well, speaking from a place of Aquarius as we can, when it comes to like the rules and regulations and all of that stuff, we don't care. Whatever. But people really believe in these rules and regulations of the system. And in that recent article I wrote was midpoint 2024, fall of the corporatocracy.
And I'll put that link below for
cool.
people since you're referencing it. Yeah.
Yeah, because most people don't realize we are living in a corporatocracy. Because all of these organizations who are parading or masquerading as governments are actually all corporations registered with Dun and Bradstreet. They all have their Dun numbers. You can look it up. It's like, okay, great. To pick on let's pick on Illinois. Okay, state of Illinois, all capital letters. That's corporation. Okay, look up its Dun number. City of Chicago, all capital letters, etc. They're all corporations, and so many things that people call laws constitutionally here in the U.S. are actually not laws. But they're not designated as laws; they're codes. Okay, like IRC, Illinois Revised Code. So even in that legal jargon, and what games are played there, it's all grammar fraud. It's crazy, but yeah, they're not called laws. So out here, people say they're laws, and the people they have in the legislatures are called lawmakers. No, they're doing codes for the corporations.
Hmm.
But more and more people are seeing through this.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we may also notice with all these planets moving in Gemini too, is kind of some code cracking because when you are locked into one way of viewing things, it's hard to crack a code. But when you start looking a little here and a little here and a little here, and you start noticing patterns, that's how you crack a code. And so I think all this verbal energy with Gemini is likely to start rewriting some scripts that people have been kind of well, I keep hearing that term by the consent of the governed, right? It's like as you realize, oh, some things are not the way that we thought, it's like, wait, the fine print is different. Then at what point do you no longer have consent of the governed? And then you're talking again more Uranian energy.
Yeah. And when I had first moved out here to Nevada, this place had this reputation for being so independent and the people are cool, blah 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 blah. And so I thought, oh, it'd be nice to get a copy of the state constitution. I want to see what especially the preamble has to say, because I always really appreciated New Hampshire's, because they really emphasize that only govern with the consent of the government or the governed. Yeah. Um, and I was horrified with this one, because right there, first paragraph, the state's first obligation is to the federal government.
Mm.
Oh, it's like the people here were sold down the river on day one.
Mm.
Yeah, it's like, oh, so more and more of this stuff is coming to the surface, and people are just thinking, well, I never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
We were always told blah, 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 blah. Well, blah, blah, blah turned out to be a bunch of rubbish. And so more people are seeing through it. And we're going to see more and more of this, especially with all this Gemini action.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that the South Node moving through Libra has something to do with that too, with like all the legalities, all the court cases, all the agreements, all of that stuff is up for review. It's like, because it's South Node in Libra, it's not North Node in Libra.
Yeah, and the North Node is encouraging us to be more independent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
After all, you don't go to Aries if you just want to get in line.
Yeah.
So that's the exciting stuff. So the fall of the corporatocracy, because more and more people are getting this information. It's one of these things that once you see through an illusion, that's it. It's over. You can't unsee what you have seen.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty jazzed about the big picture stuff, even though it's not real comfy, cushy going through some of this stuff on our personal levels, month to month, week to week, day to day grind or whatever is happening. But if we can just maintain our balance in the midst of this and do our best, the best of our ability, lighten up and enjoy the journey, because as astrologers, we look at big patterns too, and we can see where this is going in the big picture. So we know, it may not be fun getting through it, but once we get through it, it's going to be worth it.
Yeah. And we haven't mentioned July 26th, Chiron stations retrograde in Aries. So that's another kind of big event that happens this year. And 23 Aries, 23 Libra, that is very important to Israel, because Israel's ascendant is at 23 Libra or 22 Libra, but it's like right in that area. So, I mean, we may see something happening with regard to that. I know when the nodal axis was crossing that point was when some big stuff happened last October. And so, it's not just the United States. The US natal Chiron is at 20 Aries, so we're still in orb. And that 20 Aries point is going to get another crossover and then another crossover. And then finally, that transit will be complete. But that's been a lot of crisscrossing since last year as well, right on that 20 degrees Aries point.
Yeah. And Now we've had some action at 19 degrees Aries, all these little points here. And it's
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah. And again, it's like you say, you can't make this up.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
in the world of investigation, the basic saying is once, okay, that's an incident.
Mm-hmm.
Two, well, that could be a coincidence. Three is a pattern.
Yep.
Four is pattern and practice. But when you get into the dozens, it's like this is pattern and practice. It's like this really is, for the most part, scripted.
Mm-hmm.
We do have our latitude, and we can make our little bits in business and ad libs and so forth. But this is just going to play out, and we know where it's going. So I also mentioned in that article about walking the path of fear or the path of faith.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what we want to do here is encourage people to have the faith, understanding where this is all leading. Because we can get fixated on the little details as this cascade goes on, and maybe then we can pan the camera back a little bit and see how it's all connected,
Mm-hmm.
because it really is. And
Yeah.
so it's going to be pretty stunning. As we say, hindsight is 2020. And as you mentioned earlier, yeah, here we are before the 15th and 16th happened, and we're, oh, what's gonna transpire there? Well, we don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but what's it going to look like next year at this time when we look back at it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting exercise to do, to sort of like project yourself forward. And sometimes I like to do this in dreams, before I go to sleep. Okay, future self, happiest, most prolific, most productive, healthiest, future self. What do I need to know or do? It's like, how did I get through this? How did I manage this? And see, because I think we have lots of different future selves. And so I always specify, I want a particular future self. I don't want the future self that has, gone belly up and, complete disaster, trauma drama. I don't really want to hear from that one. I want to hear from the one that got it right. And then just see and imagining yourself looking backwards on this time, like what would feel successful, what would feel empowering, what would feel healing, because especially if you're in the US, I mean, we're still in that Pluto return at the same time as the Chiron return. And so, I mean, it's painful for the country, but it doesn't have to be like a defeat. With Pluto, you always get that regeneration. And with Chiron, even though there's pain, there's also healing on offer. And so on a personal level, but also on more of like a collective American level, but also a worldwide level, healing and regeneration are on offer.
Yeah, and so many people want to make a Pluto dartboard, oh, that damn Pluto. They're moaning about this. Oh, Pluto tore down my slum. Okay, yeah, Pluto did that, yeah. But then later, Pluto gets no credit for the beautiful office park that's at the same place.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is always that regeneration after you remove the old stuff that has served its purpose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And since we're living in the field of infinite possibilities, really, there are infinite pasts, infinite futures, and here there are infinite parallels of the present. It's like, okay, pick your timeline, but there's so much here that we've talked about already. It's like we are stepping into choice.
Mm-hmm.
We can choose our future timelines here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all a game. Have fun.
Yeah. So as we're getting kind of close to wrapping things up, anything that we haven't talked about that you think we really need to mention?
Well, I don't know about need, but a fun one that I just briefly mentioned in that article is about the 16th
of July, right? July
Yeah,
16th.
16th of July. Because really the 15th and 16th, that's all one blob to me. So at any rate, when the moon is moving through Scorpio, yeah, it does the trine to Saturn and moves up forward, trines the sun, and goes exactly opposite the hot spot over there in Taurus, because there's Uranus, Algol, and Mars. And then exactly trines little Neptune, but on the actual opposition at 26 degrees, when you've got the moon in Scorpio exactly opposite Uranus in Taurus, you do have an exact trine from Black Moon Lilith to that hot spot over there, because she's going to be at 26 of Virgo. So I mentioned, and maybe that will help, or maybe not.
Well, it may die down some of the reactivity anyway.
Yeah.
And around that same point is also Therius, who I keep mentioning. And I mean, I was mentioning Therius so much in videos and blog posts that I was kind of like, why am I mentioning Therius all the time? But it's been kind of uncanny how it's been like exactly square, or exactly conjunct, or I mean, it's this lurking presence, which is what Therius does. And so that I didn't look up the exact degree, but I know it's like around 25, 26 or so of Virgo at this time. So Black Moon Lilith will be also conjuncting that point. And, when you work with Black Moon Lilith, I mean, there is a Uranian quality to her. I mean, I kind of think of Black Moon Lilith as like if Pluto and Uranus got together and, turned into like a magical hag or something, like then you'd have Black Moon Lilith energy. And so there is this kind of break free kind of energy, but yeah, in earth signs though. So it is a little tempered with both Uranus and Black Moon Lilith in earth signs.
Yeah. And just the imagery of Lilith, does she like to be independent?
Yeah, she demands it.
That's it. It's like, okay, I've had enough of this, and she packs up and leaves the Garden of Eden. Bye. Well, if you can't be free, go somewhere else.
Yeah. So yeah, that having that as a trine as opposed to a square at that time, I think bodes well, because we have a square from Black Moon Lilith to the July 5th new moon in Cancer. There's a square, and Black Moon Lilith, true Black Moon Lilith on July 5th is right at 11 Libra, right on that south node. So very active energy behind the scenes. And I definitely do find that the true Black Moon Lilith is the one that seems to trigger things as opposed to the mean.
Yeah. And again, so many of these pieces you put together, and it's like, this isn't coincidence. So understanding where it's going, that can help us move through the little glitches as we make our way through this time. But we can expect for the next several months, there's just going to be a cascade of events that are intermingled. It's all intertwined.
Yeah.
And we can have some fun, especially with all the action in Gemini, just finding all the cool data points and finding all these cool patterns and so forth. Pattern recognition is a major part of intelligence. So let's brighten up as we lighten up here.
Brighten up as we lighten up. I like that. So we will return before September 1st, because that's when Pluto re-enters Capricorn for the final time, and also Uranus stations retrograde that same day. So that's likely to be quite the event, but I think we'll save really looking at September, October, November, December for there, just to kind of keep this focus to July and August.
Yeah, because when we get Pluto back in the anaretic degree of Capricorn, it's like last call, kids. And what's the corporatocracy going to try to do in its last ditch desperation effort? We'll see. And I still see the trend toward at least not a timely election. Plenty of interference going on. And so the U.S. is going to be a real insane place, but let's be amused.
Yeah, but also be in the moment too.
Sure.
It's like knowing this is like the weather report. So, bring an umbrella, bring your rain slicker, like be prepared, but go about your life as well.
Yeah. And again, if we don't feed our energy into those narratives out there with like emotional investment, well, then that's energy that we had previously allowed the system to use
Mm-hmm.
to manifest what it wanted, not what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's completely shifting now, and more people are waking up to that game, and we're just maintaining our field
Right.
and letting that stuff play out because it's weaker and weaker and weaker as it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Because those beings who are manipulating things are not creative.
Mm-hmm.
They need us to do the creation for them.
Yeah.
And most of us have already unplugged from that.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, always a pleasure having you share your wisdom with all of us. And I will see you before September 1st sometime.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. You take care. Oh, yeah. Quick. How do people find you?
soulpurposereadings.com.
All right. Great. And I'll have that linked below as well as your article that you've been referencing.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. You take care. Thank you. Bye. Woo. All right. I think we covered some good stuff.
Yeah.